This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. More about them at the end of the video. Did you know that Last Night in Soho was heavily influenced by a film that came out in the 60s? Be sure to grab some popcorn and strap in as we unravel Edgar Wright's new film, Last Night in Soho. Hey everybody, happy Halloween, welcome to Burns Reviews, and today we are breaking down the new film by Edgar Wright, Last Night in Soho. If you're new to the channel and want to get videos just like this, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and ring that notification bell, you know the deal. And also, if you've never seen Last Night in Soho, be sure to go check out our spoiler-free review right here. We talk about it. I thought it was one of the best films of the year, but without any further ado, you've been warned. Spoilers ahead. Let's talk about it. Last Night in Soho. Last Night in Soho had its world premiere at the 2021 Venice Film Festival on September 4th, 2021. It was originally slotted to make its premiere in the States on September 25th, but due to world events was pushed back to October 29th. With a budget of an estimated $43 million, the film was predicted to open at $5 million in its opening weekend, competing against other Halloween-themed films such as Antlers and, well, Halloween Kills. With that said, Wright's last feature, Baby Driver, made $277 million on a $34 million budget back in 2017, so there is a good chance that this film will be a success regardless of world events. Pre-production. Edgar Wright first had the idea for Soho back in 2012 when promoting his film The World's End. The film was pitched to Film 4 Productions as Wright felt it was a good fit for the film. Film 4 loved the idea and immediately agreed to fund the research needed for the late 1960s. Following the success of Baby Driver, Wright was feeling the pressure to put out a sequel and knew this was the right time to delve back into Soho, stating, "There was a pressure to do a sequel to it immediately, but I knew in my head that I had to do something else first. For my own sanity, I couldn't quite face doing a second huge car chase movie straight away. And when you have the opportunity to make an original movie with new challenges, you take it." For the part of Eloise, Wright initially wanted Anya Taylor-Joy after seeing her at the Sundance Film Festival in the film The Witch. Taylor-Joy was also a fan of Wright, so accepted the role right away. Upon completion of the script, Wright sent Taylor-Joy an email stating, "I have two surprises. 1, the Soho script exists. 2, I want you to look at Sandy." She was 100% on board. When asked why the switch, Wright said, "Seeing her in other roles over the years and watching her grow up in the public, I thought maybe she's the other part." So for the part of Eloise, Edgar Wright had tapped Thomasin McKenzie, who had just stunned audiences with her breakthrough performance in Deborah Granick's Leave No Trace, as the isolated daughter of an army veteran who has raised her to live in the woods. She followed that with a string of similarly acclaimed work, including the crucial role in Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit. Matt Smith was also added to the lineup as the mysterious talent scout Jack. Smith was a friend of Wright's for several years, but had never been able to find a project to work on together. Terence Stamp joined the project because his nieces were huge fans of Baby Driver. Diana Rigg, along with Margaret Nolan, both alumni to the James Bond franchise, also joined the cast. Edgar Wright has unofficially had a tradition of casting actors from the James Bond franchise, such as Timothy Dalton in Hot Fuzz, as well as Pierce Brosnan and Rosamund Pike in The World's End. Unfortunately for Rigg and Nolan, this would be their final completed films before their passing. Inspirations. Anya Taylor-Joy stated that for her character, she took inspirations from the 1967 British film Poor Cow, which is interesting because if you look at the plot synopsis on Wikipedia for Poor Cow, the parallels are uncanny. The main character's name is Joy, she has the same exact haircut, and most importantly, she is a naive young girl who dreams of being famous only to quickly have those dreams dashed by several evil men causing her to resort to prostitution and taking a job as a barmaid, never really making it. Also in both films, Terence Stamp plays a character who tries to help Joy, but in the end, fails to do so. Yeah, Terence Stamp is like the Robert De Niro of this film, which is probably the best way to put it. The king of comedy is to Joker as is Poor Cow is to Last Night in Soho. It's not a complete copy-paste, but the influences are undeniable. You take a DVD for Poor Cow, throw it in a DeLorean with a ghost, set the date to 1965, and you have Last Night in Soho. Which honestly, I'm okay with. Considering how obscure Poor Cow is to audiences in 2021, I think it's one of the less egregious uses of borrowing from another film. I mean, at least it wasn't another inferior remake that we get in Hollywood every 2 months. Costume and makeup. For costume and makeup, Edgar Wright cut together a video that showed what he was going for. It included icons such as Bridget Bardot, Celia Black, Julia Christie, and Petulia Clark. For the production design, audiences will be surprised to find out how much of the film was actually shot practically. For logistical reasons, they couldn't actually shoot at the entrance of the real Café de Paris, occupying a major London street for the scene. A huge poster for James Bond's film Thunderball was erected over the cinema in advance during the shoot, and many unknowing locals tried to buy tickets for the film. Wright felt that London and Soho had been missing from the big screen in recent years, and wanted to include inspirations from the films that he grew up on, such as Seance on a Wet Afternoon and Deep End, both examples of films that use central London as key locations. For inside Café de Paris, giant sets were built to allow cutouts behind some of the windows and mirrors, allowing Thomasin McKenzie to shoot behind cutouts and then adding a backdrop behind her later in post. For some of the dance sequences, there are definitely some match cuts. However, I was surprised to find out that for a lot of the shots, both McKenzie and Taylor-Joy would be on a set, alternating with one another and trying to stay out of the frame once their shot was done. I think this is one of the strongest elements within the film. It truly speaks levels to how incredibly sublime the choreography was. Both Taylor-Joy and McKenzie worked with a body language coach for weeks in order to learn each other's moves and work in unison, which in my opinion really paid off in the end. Then there's the soundtrack. Oh my god. I haven't loved a mixtape like this since Guardians of the Galaxy. With needle drops from Dusty Springfield, The Who, James Ray, The Kinks, Sandy Shaw, and even 3 additional covers performed by Taylor-Joy herself. The soundtrack is definitely a must-have, especially if you're into vinyl. Composer Stephen Price, who had previously worked with Wright on Baby Driver, lamented that once again he used a technique of weaving his score in and out of the songs, and has added what seemed like diegetic sound into the music, sometimes in sneaky ways, which makes for a seamless listening experience throughout the film, never knowing where the soundtrack ends and where the score begins. Price said that he was channeling The Wizard of Oz by shifting from mono to stereo, or from front speakers to surround sound whenever Eloise would enter the 1960s. If you have a chance to check them out, both the score and soundtrack are now available, and I would highly recommend them. Which brings us to the ending. Once again, spoilers ahead. At the end of the film, we find out that Sandy was never in fact murdered by talent scout turned pimp Jack, but rather she was the one that killed him. This, of course, is not completely unwarranted, as in earlier in the film, Jack had promised Sandy a chance to be a rising star, only instead to reduce her to small embarrassing roles, sleep with other women after saying he would only be with her, and eventually pimping her out to middle-aged men in the hopes of furthering his own career. Now, don't get me wrong, I am in no way saying that it was warranted that Sandy killed Jack along with the other men that she killed off that were sent to her room. But at the same time, I can't really say I feel bad for what happened to them either. Flash 2 in the present day, Eloise is being haunted during the day by an assembly of faceless men, ghosts if you will. In the third act, we find out that these were the same men that Sandy was killing and hiding in the floorboards. Eloise attempts to go back to her flat to pack her stuff and leave with John, but is stopped when her landlady, Miss Collins, drugs her tea. It turns out that she's Sandy in the modern day, and now she wants to kill Eloise and her boyfriend because she doesn't want to be found out for all the murders that she's committed. The ghosts of Weinstein Past show up again at the house to ask Ellie to kill Sandy so that she won't be able to hurt anyone else. A brief scuffle takes place between Sandy and Eloise, and during so, a fire breaks out which starts to burn down the house. It's with this that Miss Collins, now perceived by Ellie as a young Sandy, now tells Eloise to run away and save herself, that her time is over and she doesn't want to go to jail. Eloise and John make their way to safety, and Sandy sits on the bed embracing her fate as she burns in the fire. Some time passes, and we find out that Eloise is now able to live out her dreams as a promising fashion designer. All seems to be going well. Her grandma tells her that her mother would have been proud of her, and right before the film cuts to black, Eloise looks at the mirror to see a young Sandy now looking back at her in her reflection. Okay, so let's go back a second. Early on, I suspected that Jack was not Terence Stamp in the present day. It just felt too damn obvious. The dialogue that he has just feels too vague and ominous, and if he was really a big bad villain, he would have said something a little bit more concrete. So then I thought maybe her mother, who had mysteriously died before the events of the movie, was Sandy. But that doesn't really add up, because that means her mother would have been 60 when she had her. So that's out. And then there's her grandma, Gran, who would be age appropriate to be Sandy, who I was kind of suspicious of because she's introduced in the beginning of the film and then completely never seen again, which is very much a trope in the horror genre when you want to conceal somebody somebody who's going to be a villain later on. But in no way did I think that Miss Collins, the landlady, was Sandy. It just didn't occur to me. For one, she's still alive, so how can she be a ghost? This is my theory. Hear me out. This is what I think actually happened. If you read the press notes for the film, Edgar Wright, amongst others, talk about how there is no time travel in this movie. I've seen a lot of people talk about how the bed is like a DeLorean. Wright himself has said this is not the case. What I do think is going on is that Eloise, much like her mother, is a psychic, or better put, a medium. The entire film, we are led to believe that Ellie might be crazy and have DID, that Sandy is a figment of her imagination, and how she is simply a character she wishes she could be more like. We're also led to believe that maybe Eloise is just unwell. I mean, she does try to stab somebody with a pair of scissors, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But imagine, if you will, that you have psychic abilities, but your skill set is low. You don't know how to control these abilities. Hell, you don't even know you have them. Yet one night you go to sleep, and your mind is able to track the mind waves of people that are nearby. It would explain why in the beginning of the film she's able to see her mother at home, and why she would be able to see Sandy once staying at the new London loft. I think in a certain Inception kind of way, Ellie is not going back in time, but rather entering Miss Collins' dreams while they're both sleeping. And while Miss Collins would dream about her past in the 60s, which would turn into nightmares, so would Ellie. It would explain a lot if you think about it. They're both under the same roof, and as the film goes on, Ellie's abilities grow stronger, and now she's able to have visions while she's awake, which allow her to see the ghosts of the men that Sandy killed, and eventually see their faces and hear their voices at the very end. This is Ellie getting stronger as a psychic. Now, of course, none of this is explicitly spelled out to the audience, but I kind of like that. I often feel when a film has to over-explain the supernatural elements, it starts to lose its coolness, and it's easier to pick apart. For example, one question I had is, what is Miss Collins seeing during all of this? I can only assume that she was having the same dreams, but like many of us, doesn't remember having them upon waking up. Now, I will say, I do think it was a bit clunky when Sandy was telling Ellie to go and save herself and run away, because the entire film, Sandy is portraying this cool Audrey Hepburn type character, and then out of nowhere she just becomes sentimental? And considering this is the only time in the entire film that these two have a conversation, you do wish they didn't speak in forced exposition. But I get it. We have to wrap it up quick. Personally, I think it could have been done a little bit better, but it's fine. I know what they were going for, and hey, the building is on fire, so there's really not a lot of time to talk. Then there's the epilogue scene where we see Sandy in the reflection. Again, as a medium, Ellie would be able to see spirits, living and dead. So this actually makes a lot of sense. And whether you think seeing her is either metaphorical or not, I think it works either way. It's a cute way to end the film, and it makes it feel like a campfire ghost story, which at its core is what this movie really is. The bigger issue that people seem to have with this film is that, going back earlier, Ellie is able to thrive as a prodigy fashion designer who's going to leave her college and make a big splash, despite the fact that she almost stabbed one of her classmates with a pair of scissors in a library. In public. I know the movie tries to hand-wave this away. Her boyfriend John does tell everyone, it was an accident! But bullshit. You can't just almost stab somebody with a pair of scissors in a public library in front of all of your classmates and have those very classmates give you a standing ovation for having the trendiest fashion designs a month or two later. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, maybe she could have talked her way out of being expelled, but being the main event come midterms? I think not. I mean, the girl she almost stabs still hates her. We have a brief shot where she looks at her in the end and she's like, I see you, and I still hate you. I mean, all they really had to do was include a scene like somewhere along the way where maybe Eloise is able to smooth things over with this girl, you know, show her a couple of different techniques on some of the sketches or putting the dresses together, and maybe it would have made her better and they could have, you know, had a little bit of more of a mutual respect for one another. But this is just like, really? Then again, this is the same girl that drugged her drink earlier in the movie, so meh, she kinda had it coming. When talking about the film, Edgar Wright said, it's easy to romanticize previous decades, even ones you weren't alive for. Maybe you would be forgiven for thinking that time traveling back to the swinging 60s would be amazing, but then there's a nagging doubt. Would it though? Particularly from a female perspective, sometimes you're talking to somebody who was there in the 60s, where they would talk very effusively about it, stories of wild times, but you always feel that there's a little hint of what they won't say. sometimes if you ask, they'll say it was a rough time as well. So the point of the movie is to ask what's behind those rose-tinted spectacles, and how quickly that part reveals itself. Which is exactly what the film is all about. We've all romanticized what it might be like to live in a different time and place. Considering now the world events, now probably more than ever. Me personally, I'd probably go back to the 90s, back when I was a kid. Not that I'd want to be a kid in the 90s. Not to sound like somebody's grandpa, but people were more social and connected. They weren't nose down on their smartphones. They actually had to talk to one another. After the tragic events of 2001, everything changed. People became more paranoid and afraid and cynical and all the things that Jeff Daniels says in the beginning of The Newsroom. Then again, there were some things in the 90s that I don't miss. Get off the internet, I'm trying to make a call! Call them after 9 when your minutes are free! I think the important thing to remember is that no matter what generation you're a part of, or any decade, every decade and generation has its own unique problems. Different decades aren't better or worse, they're just different. So just enjoy the time you do have in the time you have it. Or better put, as Doc Brown would say,
your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one.
But that's my take on it. What did you think of Last Night in Soho? Be sure to comment down below and give the video a like if you could. And if you know someone who likes videos just like this, be sure to give it a share. It's the only way that we know that these are the kind of videos that you guys want on this channel. Also, before I go, this video is sponsored by ExpressVPN, who are allowing me to give away 3 months absolutely free when you sign up for a 1-year pack. You may not be able to travel to a different time, but with ExpressVPN on the internet, you can travel to any location you want, allowing you to watch any of the TV shows and movies that are not available in the country that you're in. Want to watch one of the Batman movies and catch up before the new one comes out? Bam! ExpressVPN has you covered. It's also the best way to protect your personal information and data from sites that may try to obtain it. I'm looking at you, Mark Zuckerberg. So go check out ExpressVPN by clicking the link in the description down below and protect your personal information today. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. I have been John here on Burns Reviews. You just got burned. Be sure to subscribe, ring that bell, give the video a thumbs up, and we will see you next time.